Oh my goodness. I cannot believe I have Thomas Westbrook in the house from Holy Koolaid. Dude, welcome to the Timmy Gibson Show.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. And just for all the regular listeners to my channel, my name's Timmy Gibson. I'm a former fundamental evangelical, Bible-thumping, tongue-talking, Holy-Ghost-Rollin pastor. Did that for 30 years and deconstructed about 7 years ago. So, and Thomas played a role in that. And it really is an honor to have you on, because I watched your videos early on. I used to hate you, and your stuff made me so angry, so upset, but they made sense, And so, yeah, thank you for all of your hard work and all the things that you've put out there over the years, specifically as it related to, my silly belief system at the time. And thank goodness I've been freed from that. And it's been a really wonderful journey to escape that. So thank you.
I appreciate the kind words. I'm curious, before we dive into anything else, was there
Yeah.
anything particular about my content that made you start to question, or what was your gut reaction? You said initially you hated me, or you hated my
Absolutely. Yeah,
content.
because Ken Ham was
on the
savior.
other side.
Nothing fails. I think probably the one that got me the best was the Nothing Fails Like Bible
History.
something, Bible history. That's it. Nothing fails like Bible history. And yeah, I mean, the confirmation bias, the cognitive dissonance, and I just didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to hear anything that contradicted what I believed. But there was something about, honestly, Thomas, I value kindness, and you seemed like a nice dude. You know what I mean? Like you didn't seem like an asshole. You seemed like a nice guy that was just, talking. And that really just impacted me. And you got my ear, And then I started like reading stuff and like, I don't think he's right. And then I start reading up on it. I'm like, well, dadgummit, he's right. Like, it's not lining up with what I'm learning in my evangelical Sunday school class, but it's lining up with all of the science community and all of archaeology and all of, all of this stuff. Yeah. So yeah, it's seriously, kudos to you. It's really, I don't know if you get calls or messages like this enough, but you genuinely helped me deconstruct and walk away from the delusion.
Nice. No, I get emails from people. I think when I was smaller, I used to actually have more people reach out to me because they assumed that my inbox wouldn't be as flooded.
Yeah.
And so you get a lot of people reaching out and contacting you. And then once you reach a certain size, I think there's kind of a sweet spot where people are like, oh, he's too big, he won't ever see my email.
Right.
But I used to get a lot more emails from people saying, oh man, I saw your content and it changed my mind. And I think there's a sweet spot, because then you get super big and then you're just reaching more people, so the emails come flooding back in. But I love hearing that, because for me it was very much the same. Obviously I wasn't influenced by my own content, but it was trying to disprove the other side that got me down this rabbit hole, where I wanted to go where the truth led. I wanted to follow the evidence, but I didn't want to just blindly say, well, there's experts on both sides and these creationist experts say that you're wrong. I want to know why. I want to know, what is the evidence behind this? What is the methodology that's being used? And then if we gather enough evidence and we are able to analyze it properly, we can make a case for Christianity, for the Bible, for the resurrection of Christ. Sure. And who knows how many souls I could save in the process.
Right.
But I wasn't about to do it in a dishonest way. I didn't want to be insincere or to try to pull the wool over people's eyes, because in my mind, truth withstands scrutiny. So if it is true, then we should be able to scrutinize it. We shouldn't be afraid to look behind the curtain and to ask for evidence. And eventually that led me to where I am, and I started deconstructing and making videos, and the rest is history.
Yeah. Yeah. Same for me. It was the pursuit of truth. The truth will set you free. And it truly did, and I wasn't afraid, because I thought, like you, I've seen so many of your videos. I know our stories resonate or align a lot. And a lot of what I believed was just, it's what the Bible says, the Bible's the word of God, it can
You
be
were word of faith, weren't you?
Yeah. Pentecostal, okay. Evangelical. But then I got over amongst the Word of Faith group. So yeah.
Man, I'm not sure which direction you want to take this show, but I could I could talk all day about the dark history of the faith healing movement and Word of Faith and all the cult like stuff that they're in, and the
Oh, well, I
scams and
love
the
that because I know a lot of those people, and I have to,
really.
yes, like I know them personally, like I have their cell
Mm.
number. Yeah. So I ran in those circles. I went to Rhema Bible College. It was Rhema Bible Training Center at the time, Kenneth Hagin Ministries. And I
Oh,
actually
okay.
knew Kenneth Hagin. I was in Kenneth Hagin's home. Like I hung out with these people. So yeah, I was very familiar with that group. Yeah, it's quite wild.
Have you taken time to study the history of the movement, going back to like the turn of the 20th century and then the 1940s, 1950s, or have you
I
reached that
haven't.
stage of your research process yet?
No, I'm curious because I was in it, so I have not. Can you fill us in on the history of the Word of Faith movement? I'd be fascinated to know
Mm,
because, I think it was Norman Vincent Peale that really influenced uh, Kenneth Hagin. And
mhm,
he's often touted as the father of the Word of Faith movement. I don't know if that's true, but Catherine Kuhlman, I knew Carlton Pearson
yeah,
really well. He pastored
okay,
Higher Dimensions, before he passed away.
yeah.
Yeah, so I knew these people personally and hung out with them privately. So yeah, what's the history on the Word of Faith movement? I'll be learning something today.
How far back do you wanna go?
Yeah, to the beginning of the beginning of the Word of Faith movement.
Oh, it's hard to pinpoint to like an exact, this is the start. This is, I mean, you can say like when the movement kind of took on the name or when it, certain key figures launched certain initiatives. But in terms of the modern Pentecostal movement as a whole, the modern faith healing movement, it's really interesting to see sort of what it rose out of, right? So during the 1800s, you had the Great Awakening. You had these pastors just going from town to town doing these revivals in the marketplace or in some small little church or some town square, some tent revivals. And as that started to blow up, you had the occasional wandering pastor who kind of stumbled almost by accident onto miracle healing,
Mhm.
where there was this belief that okay, the miracles that happened in Jesus's time can continue today,
I
which
used to believe it.
never really died out, right? From the time of Jesus until now, uh, there were miracles that allegedly happened, but oftentimes it was tied to certain objects. So it was tied to relics. It was tied to, icons in the Orthodox Church, relics in the Catholic Church, and you would have these figures that were deemed as saints. And this notion kind of comes out of the story in the Bible where you have the woman who touches Jesus's robe, and just because she touches an artifact that happens to be associated with him, maybe if we can just get our hands on a piece of the cloth or on the nails that pierced him, maybe the residual power is still there, right? Well, by the time you get to around, the 1800s, it kind of starts to shift. You start to see people who they're still using various gimmicks. They might still have certain artifacts, certain special Bibles or healing rods or something, but the focus kind of shifts from just the artifacts and the relics that are tied to maybe a handful of saints to a living, breathing person who is embodied by the Holy Spirit, and they're the source of the miracles. So you have someone like Francis Schlatter shows up in the 1800s, and he just starts wandering around, and he's got this cane that he's carrying, and he's waving it around people, and he's performing miracles. And it's all the same stuff that you see today. You see a lot of the same placebo effect. You see people who have been misdiagnosed, or maybe they have spontaneous rates of remission, or maybe they think that they feel better in the moment because they have this flood of adrenaline, and the adrenaline is a pain killing endorphin, and so they're saying that they're feeling better, and you're getting all of these instances where you have these testimonies, and so the newspapers start picking up on it, and they start
Mm,
making a big deal out of this whole situation. And initially, I can't really find any evidence that Francis Schlatter himself was in it for the money.
right.
It seems like he was very driven and convicted, but it's really hard to piece that apart because you're looking at a story over 100 years ago that has everyone in the vicinity they're all believers. They're even the newspaper people who are skeptical, they're still believers. And there weren't a whole lot of copycats. So nowadays you have people like Benny Hinn who will do this whole faux show of humility, and you're very easily able to track down all the people who work with him and the people who he says were healed, and then you follow up with them and get the doctor's reports and they're not healed, and you're able to track his finances and his private jets and all of it. So the stories nowadays of someone like Kenneth Copeland or Benny Hinn, they fall apart under the faintest of scrutiny.
Right.
It's a lot harder to do that when you're sifting through newspaper archives from 1890. So usually the best you're getting is, you have these stories that are trying to kind of give him the benefit of the doubt. And here's this healer showing up barefoot, and he's staying with, in the house of some other random person who's hosting him and performing these miracles, and people are claiming that they're healed. And you do have a little bit of skepticism, a little bit of pushback. But the fascinating thing with Francis Schlatter is there's a point like in the mid 1890s where he just goes off wandering into the desert and he dies. And he's dead. He's very much a dead man. They find his horse's saddle with his initials engraved on it or whatever. They find his Bible. They find his healing rod. They find a skeleton. So it's like this guy, he's not alive anymore, unless he pulled off some crazy stunt to fake his death, which some people have argued. But very shortly after, within a matter of months, you start having impersonators popping up. And the impersonators have realized that there is this holy man who has a massive audience of thousands of people. And he's been able to convince all of these people that he has healing powers. And even while he was still alive, some of them were taking the holy handkerchiefs that he had blessed, and they were selling them on the secondhand market and making a killing off of these handkerchiefs, because you can sell a piece of cloth that you spent a nickel on for $5, that's a pretty big markup.
Right.
And at the time, $5 would be like, I don't know, $100 today or something. I don't know the exact inflation amount, but it was a lot of money. And so right after he dies, you have all of these imposters start showing up claiming to be him. And some of them are saying that they're Francis Schlatter resurrected. Some of them are saying that he didn't really die, that they went into the wilderness, that they talked to God and then they came back, and they have all of these different alibis, but they wind up running these scams and these cons, and some of them get arrested for like practicing medicine without a license, or for using the US Postal Service in order to commit mail fraud. And so we have records of who some of these people were, and we know what some of their legal names actually were. And so you have some of them where like they'll go in duos. Even you'll have one person claiming to be Francis Schlatter, and then another guy showing up claiming that he's this other faith healer, and they're doing this act together in tandem, where one of them's doing the miracles, the other's charismatic and doing the preaching. And they just start sweeping throughout the US, and some of them are doing it at the same time. So there's all around the country, you have multiple impersonators all claiming to be Francis Schlatter, right?
Yeah.
And this got me thinking, actually, this is a bit of a side note from the history of this movement, but it got me thinking that what if this is all happening in the late 1800s, early 1900s, as late as like 1920, then in this more modern time period, where we have newspapers, we have photographs of these people, we have court records, we have their criminal records,
we have their driver's license.
And yet in that time period, they're able to con thousands of people and absolutely make a killing. Some of them, they're arrested and they're found to have like multiple diamonds sewn into the hem of their suits, and as well as like hundreds of dollars or thousands of dollars like just tucked into different places. And and when you adjust it for inflation, you're looking at like they're just walking around with like $100,000 like stuffed away in their pocket.
Yeah.
And so if that's happening in the I say modern times, but like somewhat modern times, then is it really that unbelievable that potentially, if you go back 2,000 years ago, let's say that you have this messianic figure who's going around claiming that he has divine powers and he's pulling the same faith healing stunts. Maybe he believes it himself, and he's bought in, and it's just people are buying in because of the placebo effect. If they're not healed, he says it's that you don't have enough faith.
Yep.
If you have epilepsy, he's like, demons be gone, and then they stop seizing up. Well, most people don't have seizures forever.
Right.
Right. So in the moment, it's like, oh, he cast the demon out of them. That's amazing.
Yeah.
So if you have these kind of stories that are taking off and then spreading, and then there's, as you play this game of telephone, the word of mouth kind of causes these stories to balloon out of proportion. This character's saying that he's the Messiah. Messiah just means king. It just means I'm the anointed one. And they have these prophecies saying a king is going to come and overthrow the Romans. And the Romans are like, oh, heck no, not on our watch. You have all these other figures that are documented by like Josephus and Tacitus and others who are coming and claiming to be the Messiah, and the Romans are squashing a revolt and a rebellion. So is it really that unbelievable that you'd have another figure just like these other people who comes along, and he's, this messianic figure who gets crucified, and then maybe has impersonators popping up? Because like there were people who saw Francis Schlatter who then saw the impersonators and thought that it was the same guy.
Yep.
Because they grew out their beard, they impersonated his mannerisms and stuff. So is it really that unbelievable that something like that could have happened 2,000 years ago? And then, like our earliest gospels are quite a bit removed from the actual date of the death, and how much time and distance was there between the first-hand witnesses versus, the second, third-hand accounts then getting translated into Greek. Right. I think it's a plausible explanation. It's one of many, many explanations for what actually happened on Easter Sunday,
right,
or shortly after. But when you look at the story of Francis Schlatter, it's like there's a significant amount of money and power to be had by those willing to fill the boots of this guy who already has a massive following of dedicated fans.
Yeah.
So
it's wild. I mean, I've been to Benny Hinn's services. I mean, and it's overwhelming, because you think, how could this not be true? Look at all these people, look at all of this. It felt tangible. But, since then, I've been to, concerts and I feel the same thing. I got to see Michael Jackson in concert. I've seen Bon Jovi in concert. I mean, I've seen some pretty big names in concert, Miley Cyrus, Justin Bieber, Post Malone. I mean, some of these people, and you get that same feeling, it's just elation. You're excited to be there, and in a group of, thousands of people. Yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense. It's like, wait, the power of the Holy Spirit's moving on me here at Post Malone concert. Well, that's wild.
The Holy Spirit is remarkably similar to Goosebumps.
That's right. Absolutely. Well,
it's interesting though that
go ahead. Yeah. Well, I was going to say, what on the story, the Word of Faith movement from that point?
Yeah. So from that point, you have, obviously, you've got the Roaring '20s, and then you got the Great Depression and the World War II. As people are coming back from World War II, you have all these soldiers that have just had these horrific experiences. They're, looking for something. You have all of this propaganda now with the rise of communism, and people painting, the communists as they're the godless communists. We have to hedge against that. We have to get back to our Christian roots. So you have this governmental side of pushing Christianity into the public sphere in a way that's never been seen before in our country. It's things like you get for the first time "In God We Trust" on the currency. You get "One Nation Under God" on the Pledge of Allegiance. And even a lot of the rhetoric of the McCarthy trials has a lot of religious sentiment involved. And so if you are an atheist, they just assume that you're a communist, you're a socialist, you're a bad person, you're the enemy, you're a spy of the Soviet Union,
Yeah.
And so in order to kind of push back against that, a lot of Christians wind up diving deeper into their faith. Yeah. And so there's this new appetite for something that's more real, more authentic. And so they lean into the emotional side of it. They kind of shift away from the dogma, the doctrine, the traditional, more like Orthodox and Catholic type teachings. And there's suddenly this shift towards Pentecostalism, which that's not the birth of Pentecostalism. You can go even further back, and you've got like Parham and others who are, doing the whole speaking in tongues and going ballistic and
Right.
stuff. You certainly have that earlier, but by the time you get to like the 1950s, you start having these tent revivals popping up all over the US, right?
Yes.
And you start having people like Jack Coe, who he's this pastor, he's larger than life, and he starts doing all of these tent revivals, and he's running a number of different scams all at the same time. But he realizes that there's big money to be made. And so he starts putting out this magazine that basically it's I believe his magazine was called Herald of Healing. And then at the same time, you have the Voices of Healing magazine by Gordon Lindsay, I think his name was.
Yep.
So you got Gordon Lindsay doing this magazine, you got Jack Coe doing this magazine, and the power of the magazine was that for the first time, they're able to reach an audience at scale where they're getting 100,000, 200,000, 300,000 subscribers to their magazine.
Right.
And each one of these magazines is pushing not just ideas and propaganda, but they're also saying there's going to be an event, there's going to be a revival. And now they're able to come together with like 100, 200 different pastors, all within this kind of Pentecostal style movement.
Yeah.
And what these pastors realized, what they almost sort of by accident fell into is, I don't necessarily want to, I'm going to roll that back because I think that a lot of it was very intentional and very deliberate.
Sure.
I'll back up slightly before this to you have these faith healers like John Alexander Dowie he's going around and he's scamming people at scale. Like this guy is a 10,000% a fraud, and he's doing these faith healing revivals and stuff. And but it's all about power and it's all about money for him. And he kind of puts his foot in it and says some stuff that, rubs some different, more traditional people the wrong way. And he realizes that he is going to have a lot more luck and a lot more influence and a lot more success if he distances himself a bit from the traditional churches. So you start seeing this separation from, the Assemblies of God or the Baptists or the Methodists that have some level of hierarchy, where they have some level of oversight, where if you say something that goes against, the core doctrines of the faith, you can get defrocked, you can get excommunicated. And they start setting up their own denominations. They start setting up these independent churches. So he builds this entire cult community called Zion. And then when he dies, there's this power vacuum, and all of these other pastors start trying to come in and vie for power and vie for his following in order to get all of the money and the influence and everything that comes with that. Right around this time, like in kind of the late 1940s, there's a faith healer named William Branham.
Yep, I'm very familiar.
William Branham, to this day, among Word of Faith, he's seen as like one of the greatest prophets in American history.
Yep.
This guy, there's entire movies about him, like God's Generals, just talking about, how incredible this man was and all of these miracles and how he could hear directly from God. What they don't tell you is that Branham's life from start to finish was one massive fraud. Like this guy said that he was born super poor and he didn't have any money, and that, he had all of these miracles that happened to him and stuff. And then like, as you start tracking it, you start realizing he had a ton of money. He collected like an entire arsenal of firearms and drove around in fancy cars and stayed in nice houses. And he completely was living this second life the whole time. And a lot of the stories that he told about his upbringing in this small cabin, it's all BS. And yet he forms this cult following that to this day has, I want to say his son's organization rakes in like over $300 million a year. Wow. It's gigantic. Wow. It's gigantic. And it's called The Message, the cult, it's larger.
Still existing
cult.
Today?
Still exists today. And they read this guy, William Branham's, basically they read his sermons. They have cassette tapes of his sermons that they'll listen to, and it supersedes the Bible. If Branham said something and it kind of contradicts the Bible, Branham's word is doctrine. He is a prophet. It is seen as he basically has come in and he's a new revelation from God. He's a new prophet. And this kind of gives rise to this new movement called the New Apostolic Reformation. So they're like, this is like a new Reformation, similar to like, Martin Luther, except it's basically saying that we can all be apostles.
Yeah.
We can be just like the Apostle Paul, who wrote the, good chunk of the New Testament, but we are hearing directly from God. And so therefore our word, if you question our word, it's questioning God's word. So you start getting these phrases that they say, which you'll still hear echoed today by, Kenneth Copeland, by Paula White, by others, where they say, touch not God's anointed, right? And it's basically they're saying, one, that entire phrase in the Bible was never about prophets. It was about kings, because it was the king that was anointed by God, right? So you had Saul was anointed by Samuel. He was God's chosen king. David has an opportunity to kill Saul. He decides not to. God says, touch not, mine anointed, right? And yet there's this notion that they'll put forth, like, if you even criticize one of the prophets, if you speak out against one of the prophets, then you are bringing gloom and doom down upon your head. You're going to be struck dead because, you're going against God himself. Right. So Branham is able to weaponize that and like leverage that and lean into it. But Branham kind of sucked at sermons. He was very good at being charismatic, at doing the whole faith healing thing. But he started kind of going off the deep end. He started leaning into these doctrines where this notion of like, there's the serpent seed doctrine, where basically the sin of Eve was that she apparently slept with the serpent or something like that. And he started putting forth some extremely misogynistic takes. He started he started putting forth these like little gods doctrines, where basically you're all gods. And so that was a little bit too far for some of these other pastors. They're like, dude, this is not going to fly with our audience. We can only push this so far. So they kind of started distancing themselves from Branham, and then he died. And so they're like, okay, we're just going to sweep those teachings under the rug. But then every single one of them, when he died, they were very quick to pounce on it and be like, I was anointed under the mantle of William Branham. And they're all trying to be in the lineage of like, I am the next in line to be God's anointed. So, Jack Coe dies, and, there's a bunch of pastors that are like, oh my God, I am under the anointing of Jack Coe. And then William Branham dies, and they're like, I'm under his anointing. But all of these guys, they're running in the same circles. They're all, sharing the same tricks. And one of those tricks is one that's still used today, and it's called prayer cards. Are you familiar with prayer cards?
I used to do them. Yes.
Okay. I'm very curious.
I didn't have the earpiece in where someone was feeding me the information, but yeah, I'm very familiar with the prayer cards.
When you collected prayer cards, would you read the information, kind of commit it to memory, and then act like God was giving you a word that this person's going to be healed or that their problem's going to be solved?
I have done that before. Yes.
Oof. How did you feel in the moment doing that? Did you feel like the ends were justifying the means, or
shady? Yeah, it felt shady, because I was a guest in another church, and they had given me the prayer request while I was in the green room to look through before the service. And so I had an idea of but here's what's weird about this, Thomas, is in my mind, it was like, I wasn't thinking fraudulent. I mean, it clearly was fraudulent, but I wasn't thinking that. I was thinking that I was praying over these prayer cards and praying specifically for certain people with certain ailments. And I have a pretty good memory. So, as I'm going through them, of course, I'm putting these in my mind, not necessarily intentionally thinking, I'm going to lie and act like God gave me the information. But that is definitely how it was coming out. When I would say someone has back trouble, someone has, and it's a female, if I couldn't picture the name, it's like it's a female, and someone would stand up And, and then I
I
would
think
say,
the name starts with a B, if I'm
yes,
remembering correctly.
right, exactly. And
Except instead of if I'm remembering correctly, it'd be like, I feel like the Lord has put it on my heart that the name it starts with a B and it's a woman.
yeah, right. Yeah. So you just kind of like, it's the same, I forgot what they call it, like cold reading. You're just kind of feeling into it and letting people grab onto something and think, yeah, like that he's talking about me, and then I would be like, call them down front, lay hands on them, they'd fall out. But the wildest thing is, it's now I look back on it and, I shake my head and I'm just like, oh my goodness gracious,
Yeah.
But at the time, I thought it was real.
Yeah.
That's what's so weird about it all is I genuinely thought that I had the gift of healing and that if someone would activate their faith along with my faith and together we could get a healing. It never happened, right? I mean, it's like you said earlier about it's the placebo effect. People would be like, "Oh, my headache is gone," and like, praise the Lord.
It's so interesting that you say that because there are I'm blanking on which pastor it was just recently that got exposed just a few years ago for
Peter
basically
Popoff.
No, Peter Popoff was a while ago. It was back in like the 80s or the 70s. This was just in the last like 5 or 10 years where there was a pastor who he got caught for using like Facebook to research people, and he'd be up there with his Bible with his notes reading off stuff. And I think his son exposed him for it. And the response was, or what apparently what he would tell others in the congregation, not in the, like his followers, more like his staff or people who kind of saw what he was doing, is that, well, it's sort of like hamburger helper, right? God is, and the Holy Spirit, it's kind of the extra sauce and stuff that goes on top, but this is just the little bit that kind of gets you there.
Sure.
And the end justifies the means. If you can bring more people to God because, of this show of the miraculous,
Right.
even if it's a little deceptive, the end justifies the means. And of course,
Absolutely.
people also, they see this and their pocketbooks open and the tithes come flooding in because here's a guy who apparently is getting words directly from God, aka Mark Zuckerberg.
Right. Yeah. And you'd be vague enough. I mean, who in a group of 500 people, who's not going to be dealing with headaches? Who's not going to be dealing with backaches? Who's not going to have sore knees? Who's not, again, I'm very rational about everything now. At the time, I thought I was really feeling into it, and I was just unbeknownst even to myself, right? I mean, I was in the delusion. I had the mind virus. And so I bought into it. I thought it was real.
To anyone who's watching who is not familiar with what prayer cards are, essentially before the service, you go and you have people fill out cards that have their name, maybe their address, and on top of that, it's what would you like us to pray for? So they write down something like, I have $100,000 in student loans and I'm worried I can't pay rent next month and I need a financial miracle. Or they'll write down, I am currently experiencing stage 2 cancer and the chemo doesn't seem to be working. I need a miracle. So they fill out all of these cards, they turn them in, and then let's just say the less honest pastors and churches will take these cards, and it sounds like you were somewhere kind of in the middle where in your case, you would take the cards, you'd read them over and kind of know what are people struggling with so I can pray for them. But then that would inevitably kind of drip into the service where you'd wind up bringing forth these requests and then thinking that, okay, I'm putting this out there and God is coming and, miracles are happening.
Right.
For the more nefarious pastors, what they would do is they would actually call out the names on the cards.
Yeah, never did
that. They would act as though they were hearing it directly from God.
Right.
So the most famous case of this was Peter Popoff, who we mentioned a second ago, who built out this massive following and all of his services were televised and broadcast. And while he was in the middle of a live service, James Randi and a few others, Banachek and like a private investigator, like they all kind of went in to one of his services and they discovered that there was a frequency that just popped up that wasn't there before, kind of a shortwave frequency, and it turned
Not
out that
from
it
God,
was
but an actual frequency.
like a radio
Right.
frequency that was sounded mysteriously like Peter Popoff's wife, and she's kind of up top, getting this eagle eye view of the auditorium, and she's got the prayer cards that have been filled out, and she knows kind of who filled them out. And she's like, there's a woman in a red dress in the middle, in the third row. Her name is, Margaret, whatever, and she lives on 123 First Street. And so Peter Popoff would, with a little tiny earpiece in, he's going around like, what's that, Lord? You got Margaret in a red dress down here. Is it over here somewhere? Is there a Margaret? 123 First Street. And so he's acting like he's hearing directly from God,
Right.
and the whole thing's a scam.
Right.
And yet the guy is he's raking in millions of dollars of followers who think that this is this incredible miracle worker.
Yeah.
And the crazy thing with Popoff is he got exposed live on Johnny Carson, which was like the most popular show of the day. He went bankrupt, and then very shortly after, he comes back as a pastor, and he's doing the same shtick. He's making bank. And so people just, either they don't know, or he, in the case of Popoff and many of these pastors, they actually, when they get exposed, because there's been so many scandals of these various mega pastor televangelists and stuff.
Every time you turn around, like literally every day I wake up, there's a new scandal.
And it's always either they get caught because of either tax fraud, which is crazy because, they have tax-free organizations that don't have to file paperwork with the IRS, and yet still they get caught for tax fraud. It's like, you wonder how bad it is.
Yeah.
Or like embezzlement of some kind. One of them got caught with like a male prostitute. Oftentimes it's sex scandals.
And I knew that guy personally. I was personal friends with him.
Really?
Yeah, the one out of Colorado Springs, out of New Life.
Yeah. Ted Haggard.
Ted Haggard. I knew him personally.
Wow.
Yes.
I am so curious to pick your brain. I don't know how much you're able to disclose, but I'm so curious about some of the drama behind the scenes that you've seen.
Yeah, it's wild. It's interesting. I just did a standalone monologue talking about some of this, about just the scandals and the deviance in church. And, out of respect for a lot of the people that I know by name, I mean, if they're publicly scandaled, I mean, I'll mention it, whatever. But, it's when they get caught, I'll say this, when they get caught, what is found out is literally just the tip of the iceberg of what's
not
really
surprised.
going on. You know what I mean? Like if they got caught with one prostitute, that means there was multiple prostitutes. Actually, you know what I mean? And if they were caught with this much money, then it was actually a lot more money. Everything is way more nefarious and deeper than what it comes out in the news, because the thing is, that's what I did a video on, why I think Christianity is so immoral. And I remember feeling this way. It's that God knows my heart, right? Just because like King David, right? And so since God knows my heart, God knows that I'm pure, but I'm just struggling with this sin thing, whatever. And so it's the same reason why that guy that preached, I forget his name now, but he preached all around the world, and he didn't get found out until after he died. After he died, they found out he had
Ravi Zacharias.
Yes. Found out he had apartments all around the world and had prostitutes. And I mean, just like, what, he was literally living a double life, living a lie. And, that doesn't surprise me, and I was no angel, though. I remember thinking, I said this to one of my pastor friends. I said, and this is back obviously when I was pastoring, and I had about 300 people in my church, and I was really I wanted a mega church, right? I mean, I wanted to be the next Joel Osteen with tattoos. I just wanted to be famous. Honestly, that was my goal, right? I was going to save the world for Jesus. And so I remember telling my other pastor friend, I was like, man, I said, what do we have to do? This is after the Ted Haggard scandal. I said, what do we have to do? Start secretly doing meth and hiring male prostitutes to be able to, because he had a church of 10,000 people and all of that stuff. And it was frustrating because I was never perfect, but I was genuinely like a dude that actually read my Bible. I actually prayed. I was very sincere, sincerely wrong, clearly, but I was very sincere. You know, I mean, I didn't have a side chick. I didn't have, I wouldn't get massages on the side. I wasn't doing drugs on the side. You know what I mean? I was like towing the line. I didn't even cuss. I wouldn't even go to a Hooters, for Pete's sake. You know what I mean? Like, I was really trying to, and you understand this, it's like I was really trying to follow Jesus and really trying to live this pure life. Now, clearly, I mean, I messed up. I faltered. I wasn't perfect by any stretch, but I didn't have some secret life going on. And so that actually was part of my early deconstruction, because I remember thinking, this is bullshit. Like, this is bullshit. I'm living honest. I'm living fair. I have accountability. I have all this stuff. And why isn't the Lord blessing me? I mean, I remember, and then I'd see the people like Ted Haggart and different people scan, Benny Hinn and all these, and I knew these people, Rod Parsley. I know these people personally. I know they're behind the scenes. I know some of their staff that work with them. I know they're assholes. I know they're frauds. I know they lie. I know all this. And it began to really cause me grief. Like, I remember praying, going, God, what is this? Like, you bless these men that have these secret, scandalous lives. And yet someone, maybe this is naive, but I was like, again, this is back when I believed. I'm atheist now. But I just remember struggling with that. I would literally cry at the altar going, God, what does it take to get blessed, And then I just remember thinking, I guess it's to live a scandalous life. Like, that's what it takes.
In a way, you're not wrong. And this kind of comes, I guess, full circle back to the history, sort of, where I left off was that a lot of these pastors started engaging in dishonest behavior, and it worked.
Yeah.
And because it worked, they were able to get a bigger audience. They were able to start buying radio time and TV time and grow their following.
Yeah.
So the rise of prayer cards, you start seeing people like William Branham using them. You start seeing Jack Coe using them. You start seeing like these tricks. One will use a trick, and then it trickles throughout the faith healing community. Yeah. So one of the famous ones is the leg extension trick. I don't know if you're familiar with that one.
The shoe. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. So there's actually like at least 5 different ways to do this trick.
Yeah.
And I covered it. I did a whole video just on the leg extension scam, but basically they'll bring people up and sit them down and say, what are you struggling with? And they say, I have back problems, I have back pain, or I have knee pain, or I have, some problem, and they're like, well, it looks like, here, come have a seat. God's telling me that, one of your legs is longer than the other. And then they hold up their legs and they either kind of slip the shoe off just a little bit. Yeah. And it's just a little slip-on shoe. And then as they kind of like move the shoe back, it looks like the other foot's growing out.
Right.
Or sometimes that when they pick up the legs, they'll kind of tilt it so that like it's,
shift it over. Yeah.
Or the other way. And as they shift it into place, it looks like it's growing, but it's a very subtle pulling. Or sometimes they can just grab the ankles and just kind of pull one of your feet out just a little further.
Right. Pull the hip out a little bit more. Yeah.
Yeah. Or if you have someone who's in on the scam, they can sit down and just shift their hips just a little bit.
Right.
Like there's a couple of different ways, to pull this thing off. And yet it is absolutely the telltale sign of a deliberate scam artist.
Right.
Right. If you are doing the leg trick, as I call it, then it is that, to me, when I see that a pastor does the leg trick, it's an instant giveaway that this is not someone who's kind of acting in good faith, who they believe in miracles. They're praying over someone. They say that they feel better. The pastor's getting this confirmation bias. It's just the placebo effect, but the pastor genuinely thinks that they did a miracle. Yeah. There are hundreds of pastors like that around the world who usually are running small churches. Yep. And I think they genuinely believe it.
Right.
Or they're kind of somewhere in between, like where you are, where you might get these prayer cards and you kind of feel a little dirty about it, but you still think that God is involved, and maybe this isn't the best way, but you'll kind of look the other way because this is the protocol that this church operates by, and
Yeah.
But as you start seeing these pastors and they're all running in the same circle, And within just like a couple of years, they're all speaking at the same events.
Yep.
They're all, going from one place to another, setting up these giant mega tents, and it's all for show. They're bragging about who has the biggest tent in the world, and then measuring each other's tents and one-upping it by just a couple of feet, and then, getting newspaper ads taken out, and they're trying to bring tens of thousands of people in, and they're raising money through donations, but then they're also selling all of these really short, crappy, quick written books that, to sell them, through their magazines. And
Yeah.
they're raking in massive amounts of money.
Absolutely.
But then they're also, because one of them is willing to kind of look the other way when it comes to like, I see this scam that you're doing, but like, we all have some kind of gimmick. We all have something that we're doing.
Yeah.
Then as one of them kind of looks the other way, the other one's like, okay, we're kind of in the same circle. I see you. Like we're both scammers. Let's work together. Let's prop each other up. Let's collaborate. And so you start reaching a point where it becomes much more organized.
Yeah.
So by the time you get to someone like Oral Roberts, which, this would have been, I think like maybe 1970s or so. Like I forget what year he launched his university, but it was like around the time he launched his university. He'd been a faith healer for a while, and they've shifted into, at this point, into broadcasting, where they're not just doing magazines, they're not just doing radio, they're actually buying commercial TV airtime. They're putting out, all of these different channels and stuff to try to reach a larger audience. And Oral Roberts initially has massive success. He's making millions of dollars. He's got his own private jet. Like early on, he has a private jet. That's how stupid rich these guys are. And yet he suddenly starts to struggle.
Yeah.
And when I say struggle financially, I mean, oh no, he's going to have to sell his private jet.
He'll have to sell one of his homes.
Yeah. Poor guy. He's going to sell one of his 20 luxury cars.
Yeah.
And so he's looking at selling his private jet. And at the time, there's another faith healer named Gene Ewing. Gene Ewing, he's going around and he's like absolutely just, he's going over the top, right? Because all of these guys behind the scenes, they're drunks, they're hooking up with prostitutes, they're using their money for all sorts of stuff. And Gene Ewing, he's the worst of the worst. Like he's basically, there's one story where apparently like his lawyer showed up to meet him, and he's about to go and do some faith healing revival service. And he picks him up from the airport the night before, and this guy literally walks out with a hooker around his arm, or like his arm around a hooker, and like they get into a car and go off to their hotel, whatever, do what these guys do. Yeah. And the next day, Gene Ewing is like literally doing this whole spectacle of like, today we're gonna raise the dead.
Yeah.
And this he has this corpse get rolled out in front of him, prays over it, and the woman stands up, and it's literally the prostitute from the night before. So Gene Ewing, he's doing this stuff, he's making bank, but he starts to realize that some of these pastors who are in the limelight, they're getting increasing amounts of scrutiny.
Yeah. And
he doesn't want to get exposed. He doesn't particularly want to be in the limelight as much. He just wants to make money.
Yeah.
And so he devises this entire scheme that has been the backbone of how faith healers to this day make such exorbitant amounts of money.
Yeah.
He comes up with this plan. He sees that Oral Roberts is selling his private jet. And he shows up and he walks in, and he basically, like, Oral Roberts is like a cult leader. No one dares question this guy. Right. And he just walks in and he's like, Oral, I hear you're in trouble. And he just kind of just lays it out, and everyone's like, whoa. And he's like, how about this? If I can double your income in the next 12 months, you give me your private jet for free. And Oral Roberts agrees to it. And Gene Ewing proceeds to lay out this plan where he says, what we do is we develop this very sophisticated direct marketing tactic.
Oh my
and
goodness.
Where we gather data of all of these different households and all of these different people. And it might be people who come to your service. You collect the prayer cards, you get the information, you get the names. You've already been collecting this for your newspapers. Or it could be, you get phone books and, records and stuff of people in different areas. And we're going to take this information and we're going to start sending out these direct mailing envelopes.
Right.
They're going to say something like, "Hi, I'm Pastor Oral Roberts. The other night I was laying in bed, or I woke up just with like sweat pouring down my brow, and I just felt like God put your name on my heart, that there is something that you are struggling with, and I am supposed to pray over you.
Wow.
Please respond. It's absolutely urgent and imperative that you respond to me with your prayer request, and let me know how I can work with you through this." The first one, they wouldn't necessarily ask for money, right? But once
like
the
any
person,
good scam, right?
yeah, once the person has initiated contact, they got their foot in the door. You've already asked one thing from them. They're like, "Well, I've already I've already built some sort of a relationship. I'm getting direct messages from Oral Roberts, okay." And these oftentimes, I don't know if they deliberately did this early on, but as this scam progressed, they started targeting specifically at-risk communities.
Yes.
Places that had lower levels of education, that had lower levels of critical thinking, that had higher levels of religiosity and higher levels of superstition.
That's what Robert Tilton does, or did.
Yes. Even though they have less money overall, if you can blast this out to 100,000 people and you can get more of them to bite, they also have less money to sue you if it doesn't work out.
Interesting.
And so he puts forth this idea, and what basically you send the letter out, the person writes in with their prayer request, and then you start sending follow-up mailers. You start sending these follow-up packets that say, this is, thank you so much for replying. This is so urgent. And none of this goes to Oral Roberts. He doesn't see a single mailer.
Of course.
There's this in between, this direct marketing service that's sold to him by Gene Ewing. That's like,
I have some friends that worked at one of those services.
Really?
Yeah, in Tulsa.
Oh man, I'm so interested to hear more. Let me just finish this thought for your viewers, and then I want to chase that rabbit hole. Or yeah, but basically, they would draft responses, and it would feel so personal and heartfelt, and it's like, I am personally praying over you and your problem, and I need you to, in order for this miracle to take root, God wants, it's not me asking for money. God wants you to demonstrate that you're serious about it. You have to plant a seed of faith.
Yeah.
And in the form of a cash donation. And it would start small. It'd be like, send $5, and like, I have placed my hand on this paper, and they'd have like a little like cutout drawing, like something from kindergarten. It's like, place your hand here where I placed my hand, and say this prayer with me, and believe in faith, and send me a donation. And then they got even more clever about it. Instead of saying send a $5 donation, they'd say plant a seed of faith, whatever you're able. And then on the card, it would have options. It would be like, you can send a $5,000 donation, you can send a $1,000 donation, or you can send a $50 donation. And so someone who might otherwise have just sent $1, they're like, everyone is sending $1,000. I don't want to come off as cheap to Oral Roberts.
Right.
I really need to show, I need to send at least $500.
Yeah.
And so you have people who are struggling to pay rent, and maybe they needed a financial miracle, and they're told, you could have this incredible blessing. And in the envelopes, in the mailings, there's all of these testimonies, many of them complete bullshit.
Just made up.
Some of them might be real. Some of them might be that someone, they did actually like give $500, and then grandma died, and they put 2 and 2 together and said, "Oh man, it's a miracle. I was in the inheritance. I got $20,000. It's like, wait, so your miracle is that God killed grandma?
Had your grandma died and you didn't send that in, would she have stiffed you?
Yeah. So, but you get these kind of testimonies where people like, just, it's a lot of confirmation bias. And then like, there's fake testimonies, there's everything in there. Right. So you get this envelope that has all of these stories of all of these people that are like, I gave $50 and then I got a clean cancer diagnosis back from the doctor. And people are like, man, I'm spending thousands of dollars on my cancer treatment. Like $50 is nothing.
Right,
You
right,
know?
right.
Sure, I
This
can
is a
give
good
$50
deal.
to this guy. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so this direct marketing scam takes off. Like it explodes. And within a few years, you have so many of these mega pastors who are all using the same service. Don
Yes.
Stewart,
Yep.
Peter Popoff, T.L. Osborne, Oral Roberts, Robert
Robert
Tilton.
Tilton, Jim and Tammy Faye Baker, Jimmy
Yeah,
Swaggart. I met Jimmy
they're all,
Swaggart, and I know the son of Jim and Tammy Faye Baker. I know their son personally.
yeah. Is he an atheist now, or is he still
You
religious?
know, I would say, at least the last time we spoke, he was like a super edgy, beer drinking, cigar smoking, tattooed
Mm,
Christian.
yeah.
You know, you know, yeah.
It's
I
so interesting that,
It is
yeah.
so fascinating. But that was, I'm curious, and I want you to finish the story of the Word of Faith healing. But when I think about even my journey, it was a very kind of like the zero entry pool, right? I mean, I didn't just I wasn't an evangelical conservative pastor fundamentalist, and then boom, I was atheist. I mean, I
Oh,
became a little bit more open minded, a little bit more liberal, a little bit more,
yeah.
okay, the Bible's real, but some of it's allegory. You just kind of keep sliding away until I got to where I said, I'm not a Christian. I'm spiritual, not religious. Then I went to
Mm,
that phase. And then I thought, well, that's just now it's just that's the same kind of different. I mean, this is all the same. It's
yeah.
all believing in something without any evidence to support it whatsoever. And then
Mm.
I was like, I guess I'm an atheist. I mean, I just realized I don't
Yeah.
believe in God, you know.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I reached a similar conclusion, but it was like, okay, maybe there was a first cause. I don't know. I'm open-minded to it. I'm kind of agnostic if maybe we're living in a simulation, maybe some highly advanced alien civilization kickstarted the universe. Maybe there is something supernatural. Maybe it just doesn't interact with us.
right.
But when it comes to all of the deities and the gods of all of these man-made religions, I can say with absolute confidence that there's
Yeah.
no evidence
Right.
that they're real and a great deal of evidence against them.
Yeah.
So it's yeah. But in terms of these pastors, the ones that were willing to basically embrace these tactics, these shady tactics, they saw their money just explode exponentially.
Yeah.
And it was to the detriment of millions of salt of the earth, good, kind, everyday people.
Yeah.
And they're not scamming the atheists, they're scamming other Christians.
Right.
And
The believers.
so a lot of these believers that they're paying into this, and these pastors, they're getting ahead, they're doing extraordinarily well. They're flying in private jets, they're staying in these $10 or $20,000 a night suites in Dubai in these fancy hotels, they're going and buying $10 million houses and driving around in Rolls Royces. And they start to realize that, I think maybe early 1990s, there were a couple of exposés just on how wealthy they were. And
Yeah.
it was frowned upon. People saw it as, no, if you're Christian, you need to kind of live a frugal life and, give everything to God, and sort of, it's the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil.
Yeah.
But then they start to shift, and they start to I mean, the prosperity gospel goes back further than the 90s, but as these exposés started taking off, they really started leaning hard into it, where
Yeah.
they started saying, no, God has blessed us. We planted a seed of faith and got back, 10 times more. The fact that we're wealthy, it's a feature, not a bug, and you can be
Yep.
wealthy too.
Yep.
So the shift focused to the money, and all of a sudden they can be out and bold and proud about it. And you can try to expose it all day long, being like, this guy's he's wearing a $20,000 suit.
Yeah. I
And
used to
yet
service the Hagen's
yeah,
Rolexes, their presidential Rolexes. I used to service them.
jeez.
Yeah. 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 They had several, actually. They each had
Yeah.
several Rolex, the solid gold Rolexes that were worth probably now 50, 60,
Yeah.
70,000. But at the time, I think they were like $25,000 a piece.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm happy with my Fitbit.
I'm happy with my little TISO, my little couple $100 TISO.
Yeah.
Oh man.
But it's just that the pastors who are willing to be that shady and that dishonest and lean into the scams like the leg lengthening one and the earpieces and the prayer cards and stuff, they were the ones who were able to grow massive audiences, the ones who are leaning into these direct mailing scams.
Yep.
They're the ones who are able to bilk their followers out of more and more and more money. And as the money poured in, they could afford nicer facilities. They could afford television broadcasts. They could afford to network with all these other televangelists. And so very quickly, there was a form almost of like natural selection where the honest pastors kind of got outcompeted.
Yep.
And they either went bankrupt or their churches just didn't grow.
Yeah, just
and
along.
everyone was flocking to these people who are putting out these TV programs showing how incredible their miracles are.
Right.
And if you have no moral scruples, psychics do this as well, where psychics will use a lot of tricks by magicians.
Yep.
And then they'll act like it's this incredible gift, this spiritual or supernatural or paranormal gift. And the faith healers are doing the same thing. So the ones who have no moral scruples are the ones who are getting ahead. So your question of what do I have to do in order to get ahead as a pastor, you weren't entirely off on. It wasn't so much the, you need to do meth with a male hooker, but the pastors who you go and you meet with them and you're like, these are horrible people. These are awful narcissists with no morals. It literally is people like that who, I believe Robert Tilton's roommate came forward and said that when they were in college, he said that he wanted to become a televangelist just so that he could scam people because he thought he could do a really good job of it.
Yeah. Wow.
So you see them all using the same tricks. And at this point, like there's a great organization called the Trinity Foundation up in Dallas, Texas. And I helped them to digitize like several hundred of their old VHS cassettes because they worked with like CNN and Fox and 60 Minutes and all of these different top broadcasts to do these exposés of these faith healers. And some of them wound up getting put away. Almost all of the major scandals that got televised, the Trinity Foundation was kind of behind the scenes digging in and doing the investigative work at the kind of private investigator style look into the the finances and the scams and people who've been hurt, and they have a hotline for victims and stuff. So anyways, I met with the Trinity Foundation. They've done a lot of work digging into these guys, and it's so fascinating because they all share the same lawyers. They share the same offshore bank accounts in the same countries. Some of them are running scams or have been caught running scams where they would say that they're raising money for this orphanage in Haiti or something, and then you go and you look and there's no building there, or there's one guy who got one donation of like $100 from like 10 different televangelists, and he's like, yeah, I'll send them occasional photos so that they'll send me a tiny little drop in the bucket of what they're raising. It's better than nothing, but then I'm able to put my stamp of approval on like 20 different televangelists.
That's just so insane, isn't it? It's like,
it gets your blood boiling.
It really does. Like for me, like I watch, I don't watch, but I know of, Kenneth Copeland, and I don't know him personally, but I'm ran in some of the same circles. I know people that work for him, and I know people around him, and I know they're fraudulent as fraudulent can be. And he just strikes me as a fraud. He just absolutely, he looks like a fraud to me.
Yeah.
And
I'm always careful because of just how litigious these people are. If I name anyone by name, I say, in my opinion, I think he's a scammer, or it would seem based off of all the evidence.
Yeah, it's just absolutely, it's criminal. Like, I mean, you see it and you just think these guys are building their wealth off the backs of poor, uneducated people who are in need. It's just, it's unbelievable, at all in the name of God. It's just unbelievable. Unbelievable.
And one of the reasons that the Trinity Foundation got started was that initially they were a charity that was helping homeless people in Dallas. And what they started noticing is that in case after case, there would be homeless people that would come to them saying, like, I gave my last penny to these televangelist preachers who were promising a financial miracle. I had to foreclose on my house.
Wow.
And then when I went and I basically had to spend the last penny on gas to get to the church, I asked them, can you do anything to help me? And they said, we're not a charity. We're not a handout. And so these televangelist faith healers, they turned them away after they gave them thousands of dollars over the years. And then the Trinity Foundation would be left picking up the wreckage. Yeah. And so that's when they're like, and Trinity Foundation, as an atheist, I love the work that they do.
Right.
It's, they're a Christian organization.
Right.
But I think that they're one of the good ones who, they genuinely want to help people.
Believe in accountability and
yeah, they're furious at the fact that these people are getting away with it. And I would be too if I was still a Christian and watching this and seeing that these pastors are giving all of us a bad name and that they're scamming all of these vulnerable people. Right. And you have these people coming to to these services with conditions sometimes that can be treated medically, or maybe at least that the medicine can it might not cure it, it might not fix it, but it's something like, here's someone who has epilepsy, and as long as they take their medication, then they're not going to have the seizures, or they're going to be less often or more mild. And you'll have people who they think that they're healed. There was a case where Morris Cerullo prayed over this woman at a revival in London, and she went home, stopped taking her epilepsy medication, had a seizure in the bathtub, and drowned to death.
Wow.
So it's, and like there's so many cases where, as I started tracking this, I have a whole series on like faith healing cringe fails, where I kind of dig into the dark side of faith healing.
Yes. And I've watched many of those that you've done. They're great.
The crazy thing about this is that so many of these pastors, people say, well, what's the harm? It gives people hope. It makes them feel good. They're already struggling. Modern medicine isn't able to do anything with these cases. So they're just turning to someone for hope. Yeah. And these faith healers, they're not forcing them to give any money, but a lot of times there's so much pressure to give, but it's worse than just their pocketbooks. It's worse than just their finances. Behind every single one of these faith healers, there is a trail of body bags, a mountain high, because people stop taking their medication. They go home thinking that they're healed, and within a few months they're dead.
Yeah.
And, or in some cases, they have like, there was one guy who he had a neck brace, and his doctor said, keep it isolated because you could potentially get paralyzed. And Morris Cerullo just rips off the neck brace and starts shaking his head around, telling him he's healed. And it's like, okay, maybe he didn't have his neck snap right there on the stage. Yeah. But then what did anyone follow up with this guy? Like, was there any residual damage? Were there additional cracks to his vertebra? Like, did he go home and keep his neck brace off, trusting in faith, and then, slept on it wrong, and now he's permanently paralyzed? Like, there's just so many cases like this where the faith healers, they're acting like they're doing these wonderful services to people, and in actuality, they're selling false hope, and they are
knowingly
oftentimes responsible for a tremendous amount of physical, emotional damage, and even death.
Yeah. And it's like the boys club kind of a thing, where they all, like you said, they're all licking each other's butts and doing these conferences all together. I would say at that level, most of the ones that I think of, they're just fraudulent from the get-go,
Have you seen Marjo?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Love that show. Mm-hmm. Oddly, only watched it about 2 months ago, but I just was like, I mean, it was just wonderful. I loved it so much because I traveled as a healing evangelist for a while. And so, a lot of those circles, it's like once you're in the club, it was so common to like preach against alcohol, but secretly you would do it. And what was so fascinating about it, Thomas, is there was this thing that was just in that world, the evangelical world. Not everybody's like this, but there are a group of people like this. And unfortunately I ran in that group. If you don't have me on video or audio doing it or saying it or whatever, all I have to do is deny it. You can't prove it because I've already repented to the Lord. The Lord has forgiven me for the hooker that I didn't ever have sleep with a hooker. But, like the hooker I slept with last night, I did feel bad about that. And so I asked God to forgive me, and God forgave me about that. And it's been thrown as far as the east is from the west. So when you ask me about it, I say no, because it's been washed away. I've been cleansed by the blood of Jesus. That's why Christianity is so immoral. I know, it sounds crazy, and for me to have, and you too, I mean, you snapped out. You weren't as crazy as I was, I guess, but it's like when you start.
Oh, you'd be surprised.
Yeah. Well, you just kind of start seeing it, and it's literally, it was like I was being healed of a mind virus. And fascinatingly enough, my parents are still hardcore. I mean, they think Trump is Jesus Christ. They think, all the preachers that you and I could name that we know they're fraudulent. They think that they're God's gift to this earth. It's insane. It's literally insane. And trying to have some kind of conversation. I mean, I can't even tell you how many times I just say, listen, we can't clearly talk about politics or religion at all, because no, they think I'm obviously, as an atheist, I'm not going to be in heaven now. And so they've cried to me several times,
But it's like with any cult where when you're brought up with that level of indoctrination, there are certain phrases that are thought-stopping devices. Yeah. So for me, when I would hear someone say, anything related to millions or billions of years, my gut reaction was just to laugh. And I'm like, haha, you can't possibly believe that. You can't possibly be that stupid. Right. I wouldn't even stop to contemplate. I wouldn't even stop to look at the evidence. It was just that one phrase alone would just kind of make me shut down.
Me too.
and so as I've been doing YouTube, I've actually subconsciously and later deliberately shifted to where, when I'm making videos, I avoid certain phrases because I know that those phrases are going to shut my audience down and they're just going to be closed off to it. And so there's certain things where, I will, knowing the objections that are likely to come and knowing the arguments put forth by an organization like Answers in Genesis, I kind of circumvent it by presenting a different argument than the ones that they normally talk about. And then if there is a particular argument where I'm like, now, before you guys write this off, you might be tempted to respond with this. And they're like, oh, he knows the rebuttal. He's about to say why it's wrong. And so I'm able to kind of counter that before they simply just write it off and push it away. Yeah. So it's very interesting when you come from this world, because I oftentimes see science communicators who were raised secular, and they'll put forth this evidence and they're just like, it's so obvious. Like, how can you disagree with this? Yeah. And then they'll say things like, how can you possibly believe that Jonah lived for 3 days in the belly of a whale? And I know that the Christian response is going to be, it wasn't a whale, you idiot. It was a big fish. As if somehow that makes it better, right? Yeah.
Now it's plausible.
It's like now it's possible for him to hold his breath for 3 days and to live in stomach acid that's burning away his flesh, cramped together, well below the, at depths that are so low in the ocean that the pressure alone would kill him. Right. Or he'd have toxic levels of nitrogen and get worse than just the spins, you get an aneurysm. Right. All of this stuff is just so preposterous on the face of it. And it's like, big fish, whale, there is no difference. But they'll say, well, yeah, a whale can't swallow a human because its throat's too small, but a big fish might be able to. It's just some species that we don't know about. And so for me, I'm like, I hear the scientists that, they'll be like, come on, he didn't live in a whale. And I know immediately, the Christian's going to shut down when they hear the word whale.
Yeah. I mean, I have, even when I'm doing my own video, I'll hear, because, I was a evangelical Christian for 48 years. So I still have all those. I still have half that brain. Like that brain is still there. So I can, as I'm saying something, my evangelical brain will say, but this, but this, but this, you know. And so I'll do the same thing. I'll sometimes say, you're probably thinking this, because that's what my evangelical brain is thinking. I know it's wrong, but I know that's what the objection would be. And, you know, God can do anything, right?
Yeah.
Then it's like, so that's
And
just it.
I think that's what makes you such a powerful voice of reason, because you know the counter objections.
Yeah.
And I think I oftentimes have people that will ask me, you know, well, why don't you go after Islam? Why don't you criticize Islam? And like, I grew up in a Muslim country, and I have a lot of beef against Islam. I do think that the teachings in the Quran are absolutely cancerous.
Sure.
And I see the harm that's caused, and I see the people who are hurt by it. And so, yes, I care deeply about anyone who has been the victim of high control religion, but I don't have the level of knowledge about the doctrines and the teachings anywhere near to the same extent that I have for Christianity.
Yeah.
And I also have personal history with it. So I have a powerful story where I can share the harm that's been done, and I can show people firsthand.
Yeah.
And so while I don't shy away from talking about other religions, yeah, sure, I'll talk about Hinduism, or I'll talk about Islam, or I'll talk about Judaism. More so with Judaism, because, you know, there's so much overlap between, you know, especially the Old Testament and the Hebrew Bible. It's like, yeah, they kind of move a few books around, but it's like, it's largely the same thing.
Sure.
And so, but with the Quran, it's like, yeah, they are, you know, borrowing from the Bible. And with Mormonism as well, you know, they'll still say, oh yeah, the Bible's great, but you
Right.
know,
I saw your one.
Mormon is,
Right. I saw your one on Mormonism, and I just laughed because I laughed because even when I was a Christian, I was like, oh, well, the Mormons, that's a cult. They're crazy. That is nuts. You know what I mean? It's like, it was so funny. It's like the pot calling the kettle black. I always thought Jehovah's Witness, Mormons, they were out there, man, with crazy.
The funny thing is, there's probably Scientologists right now who see the teachings of Jehovah's Witnesses, and they're like, oh man, those guys, they're a cult.
It's just, and for me, it really was, I just started looking at my own religion like I did all these other fake, false cults.
Yeah.
I just put the mirror up in front of my own face. And then I realized, oh, this is the same thing. It's the same thing.
Yeah. It's crazy when you stop and you take a step back and you ask yourself, whatever your religion is, when you ask yourself, what would be a good outsider's test of faith that only my religion can pass, that none others can? So if I was not born as a Christian and someone presented something to me about Christianity, what could they share with me that could not also be used as verification for all the other religions? So for example, if someone says, I had a near-death experience. My heart stopped. I was on the operating table for 5 minutes. You know, I went and I had this experience in heaven, and then I was resuscitated and I came back to life, right?
Yeah.
If that is proof of your God, then when you have someone over here who had a near-death experience where they went and they saw Vishnu or Shiva, or, you know, the Hindu gods, or someone over here who saw Muhammad and Allah, and then someone over here who experienced, you know, some other religion, then to me that tells me that one of two things, or one of several things, is happening. Either one, all of the religions are true,
right?
And you know, you whichever one you chose, that's the one in the afterlife that you go to, right?
Yeah.
Or that you're not really dead, you know, because if you're looking at the electrical activity of the brain, you're, especially when you die, like, you're only measuring kind of the outside of the brain. You're not seeing deep inside what's going on.
Sure.
Right. And there is probably something residual that's still kind of firing or going off, you know, or maybe when you're revived, as you're revived, you know, you know how you can have these experiences of a dream that feels like it lasted for, you know, hours, but you were only asleep for 5 minutes.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, maybe it's like, as you're being resuscitated, you kind of have this like crazy, you know, skewed perception of time, and you had this whole experience, but it only lasted 5 seconds. who knows?
Right.
So if you have an experience like that and you say, well, this is proof of Jesus, why is it that there's some Muslim who saw Jesus in the afterlife? It's like, well, sure, that's possible that, that this is proof of Jesus. It's also possible that it's proof that this person had seen imagery of Jesus because he's everywhere.
Right.
There's almost no one on this world who has not seen a picture of Jesus. But then you ask yourself, okay, what image of Jesus did he see? Was it the blonde hair, blue-eyed Jesus, and probably not the actual Middle Eastern one? You see the Western depiction that you see all over the place in various icons.
Yeah.
But then also when you have people who maybe they don't believe in Christ, or maybe they believe in Christianity, but then they see another religion in the afterlife. It goes both ways.
Yeah.
Or people who they die and there's it's just nothing. It's black.
Right.
They or they have experiences that they went to hell and yet they were a Christian.
Yeah.
Make that make sense, So to me, it's like if you're an outsider and you're presented with this evidence, it's like, okay, you can say as a Christian, I had this incredible emotional experience when I was in this worship service, and then you'll have a Sufi saying the same experience, saying he has the same experience when he's engaged in worship with his religion.
Yeah.
So what is something that, as an outsider, if you're trying to convince me, what evidence can you bring forth that only is evidence for your religion and for no other religion, that can't be explained in any other way?
Right.
And I think that when you start looking for that, when you honestly start kind of approaching your religion from the outside, like, is this actually true? Could this actually just be evidence of another religion as well? Is there anything that actually shows me that this belief that I have is legit?
Yeah.
And you're willing to explore the history of it, the science and potential scientific contradictions, potential ways that the Bible has been changed or altered over time, going back to the older text, engaging in actual biblical scholarship and not just reading the devotionals that are made by some evangelical organization.
Right.
If you're willing to peel back the layers of the onion and dig deep and dissect it with a scalpel, then first of all, are you willing to do that? Are you willing to have that level of humility and intellectual honesty to do that?
Right. For me, it was it was midlife crisis-ish time. And it was just what you said. What evidence do I actually have that this is true? And then I started realizing the Bible was the only evidence that I had. You know what I mean? And then, of course, the Bible can't be trusted, right? It's like once the Bible started failing for me, then it's like, okay, well, if the Bible got that wrong, how has it gotten all the other stuff right? Like, if that can't be trusted, how can you trust any of this to be true? And so then I read the Bible without the confirmation bias, without the cognitive dissonance. I'm like reading it just to read it, and that's when it just seems so insane.
Were you taking notes? Were you taking notes as you went?
I think probably in the panel of my Bible and in the back of the Bible and in the margins of my Bible. I was one of those guys that felt like it was okay to write in my Bible. And some people never wanted to desecrate their Bible like that. I didn't mind it. So my notes are in the Bible.
I started doing that where, I had a side document, and I was listening to like a Bible audiobook. And because I worked in IT for several years, and so I was doing work and stuff, and I just kind of have it in the background. I'm like listening through from Genesis, but every once in a while it would hit something, and like my ears would perk up, and I'd like pause the thing, and I'd just like write a little note, and I'd be like, this verse conflicts with this verse, and this can't be true. Like, that's scientifically off. And there's two different accounts of this that are contradictory, and and I was going through, and I believe I was reading the NIV, which, there's so many problems with like the NIV and the KJV anyways, especially the NIV, because it's like it's written by an evangelical organization specifically for the purpose of like they go in to remove any contradictions. And
Right,
so if you go back and you
They
look at
fix
like, if you go back and you look at like the oldest text, you know, the Dead Sea Scrolls or like the Masoretic text or the Septuagint, and you're comparing the differences, you can see all of these discrepancies. And there's certain editions of the Bible that will leave those in there or leave notes in there.
Yeah.
And so you'll get to passages where it's like, it says that like Jehoiakim he was like 14 when he became king, and it says that in like Samuel or something. And then over in Kings, it says he's like 8 when he became king, or he's 18
Right.
when he became king, like a different age.
Right.
And it's like, you would think that to the overall story, it's like, it's such a minor thing. You know,
Sure.
it's like, there's a number, some scribe made a mistake. It's no
Right.
big deal, right? For any other document, if you were like, okay, here's 2 people reporting on the histories of, you know, Alexander the Great, and one of them got a typo in there, it's like, you expect that to be there. That's not,
Sure.
it's not a huge deal.
Right.
But when when you're raised with this notion that the Bible is inerrant and it's perfect and it's inspired by God, and it's not just inspired by God, but it's like every single book in the Bible, it might have had different human authors, but because they're hearing directly from God, it is univocal. This book
Right.
is speaking with one voice
Yep.
from the Father, and there is not a single contradiction, a single error, and you're taught that and you believe it. Then
Yep.
all it takes is just a handful of these passages that you look, and then you see the kind of mental gymnastics and backbends that these apologists and pastors go through to try to explain away and excuse the inconsistencies and the contradictions, and it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
You know, it's, you know, you'll have these 2 different descriptions of, you know, how did Judas die? You know,
Right.
did he go out and buy a field? Did someone else buy the field? What, did he hang himself? Did he fall and, you know, spill his guts? And they're like, well, he bought the field, but then he sold it to someone else, and then he was walking through the field, and then like he hung himself, but the rope broke, and then he spilled his guts on a rock, and it's like, yeah, you can kind of do that.
It's like, you made that up.
But what is more likely in this scenario? That you have an all-knowing God who writes with in the most absolutely confusing, contradictory way, or that 2 different people had 2 different versions of a story and they both got incorporated into this text, because this was not one text. These were individual letters and individual gospels and individual writings that they didn't think were going to end up as like the Holy Scriptures.
Right.
It's just, hey, here's Paul writing to, you know, the church in Ephesus.
Yeah. Right.
You know? And so when you start thinking of it that way, it's like, oh, okay, there's some mistakes in it. But then all the dominoes start to fall, because if you start realizing that there's scientific inaccuracies and historical errors, and you realize that the biblical flood never happened, and
Well, that was probably the video that's probably actually the video that impacted me the most that you did about Noah's flood.
Which one?
The one that just basically was 100% provably false, scientifically.
Yeah.
And you've covered it multiple times, but I just remember watching that and thinking, that didn't happen. You know, like that didn't happen. And yeah, I mean, it's just wild that once your eyes are open to it, I sometimes even think to myself, how do people still believe this? Of course, then I'm like, well, I did, you know, it's like, I get it. They've turned off a part of their reasoning to accept something that they've been born to believe is actually factually true. And like you said, they believe the Bible is the word of God and it can be trusted.
Yeah.
You know, and science is the enemy of God.
And everyone around you is reinforcing this belief system. So you're getting it from all different angles, and it's people who you trust. It's your parents, It's your pastor, it's your coworkers and your friends and your family.
Yeah.
So it's very hard to push back. But when you start looking beneath the surface and you realize, like, okay, maybe Genesis is just an allegory. Maybe it's, you know, like there's parts of the Bible that are historical, but like Genesis is kind of mythology. But then if it's mythology and original sin was an allegory and there was no first human, there was no, and there actually was no first human, right? Like if you look, just to explain this, right, in terms of evolution, there was never a point where there was just one man and one woman, right? Like it's
Right.
entire species that are evolving. So you have,
Right.
hundreds of thousands of individuals of a particular species that are all having very, very tiny, slow, gradual changes. And like you will always be the same species as your parents
Right.
and as your offspring,
Right.
right? Because the changes are so, so, so tiny and gradual that it's like in order for there to be enough of a change where it's like you can no longer reproduce, you have to have some separation and like so many generations of mutations and stuff over time.
Yeah.
So there's not like a clear delineation. There's not a clear point where you could say like this one's human, that one isn't.
Right. Yeah,
Even
this
among
ape
different,
birthed this human.
even among
We're a great
hominid
name, but
species,
yeah.
even among like hominids, like we reproduced with Neanderthals. We
Right.
share a percentage of DNA. Eventually
Yep.
they died out, and like there are telltale differences between them, but we were still similar enough that we could reproduce.
Yeah.
And so there's not a clear delineating point. There was never a point where there was like, oh, that's the first human, and there's only one of them, and
Right.
he ate an apple. So
Right.
as soon as you realize that that's not true, you have to come up with another way of introducing original sin somehow.
Yeah.
That's completely outside of Genesis. But as soon as that becomes an allegory, then it's like, well, did Christ die for an allegory?
Right.
If there's no original sin, then are you actually born flawless? And
Right.
then you mess up? Is it completely turns everything in the Bible on its head.
Yes.
And so for me, that was where I, to some extent, I would say I was fortunate in that I was raised as a biblical literalist and a young earth creationist, because I think if I had a more uh, kind of liberal interpretation of Christianity, where it's like, I was raised just thinking like, no one actually believes these miracles. Like I had a roommate in college who he was culturally Catholic. He was a French guy, and I remember after I became an atheist, I'm like, well, you're still a Christian. And he's like, well, yeah, but I don't believe all the bullshit in the Bible.
That's awesome.
But I think that when you have an approach where you're like, okay, everyone is saying that this book is true. Everyone's putting it forth like this is gospel. This is cannot be questioned. It's literal. It's univocal. All it really takes is a couple of threads, and then you start pulling and you realize that the whole thing comes undone.
Yeah, the whole house of cards comes down. What was it for you? Like you were a literalist evangelical Christian, and then what began your like, I don't think this is true.
It was a number of things. It was a very gradual, slow process, but a big part of it was just going to university, taking a lot of courses, studying science courses, watching a lot of TED Talks, reading a lot of books. I was super fascinated with science,
Yeah.
and so I started reading a lot of books on physics and astronomy, and the age of the Earth, and I think the topic that probably interested me the most, that also really started to shine a light on some of the flaws in the Bible, is I was fascinated with psychology, human psychology. And so there were certain tipping points where like I'd watch like the Kinahan Bill Nye debate, and I'd be like, okay, this is the kind of a tipping point where I sort of realized the dishonesty of Answers in Genesis and Ken Ham. But for me, what kind of got me slowly working in that direction was I started learning a lot about logical fallacies, cognitive biases, and self-delusion.
Yeah.
And there was an excellent podcast called the You Are Not So Smart podcast by David McCraney.
Yeah.
And he basically goes through one by one through these various cognitive biases that we all have.
Yeah.
And he starts breaking down how it works. So he might do one episode on memory. He's like, we oftentimes think that our brains capture memories almost like a video camera, and we can just play it back in our minds and remember the details. And in actuality, we're looking at various patterns, but the very act of remembering something is an act of rewriting it.
Right.
So we don't have perfect recall. And so there are many, many times and many studies that have been done on this by like Dr. Elizabeth Loftus or Dr. Julia Shaw, where they've basically been able to implant false memories in people's minds or get people to recall an event that never happened.
Interesting.
And so we have this notion in our brain that like eyewitness testimony is phenomenal and it's like the gold standard, and it's just not.
It's not.
There's an entire organization called the Innocence Project where their whole goal is to get people off of death row who were convicted by eyewitness testimony before the existence of DNA evidence, and then DNA evidence showed like they weren't the person who perpetrated the crime.
Right.
And there are loads of people right now on death row who are falsely convicted by eyewitness testimony. So it was little things like that where I started to connect the dots and see, okay, wait a minute. We're literally putting people to death in the 21st century based off of eyewitness testimony that is demonstrably false, and we can prove it using DNA. And to me, that's good enough to say, okay, eyewitness testimony is not the greatest. These people were wrong. And yet I'm willing to swallow whole cloth these stories that were based off of eyewitness testimony 2,000 years ago, where it's like this person says that they experienced this or saw this, but then we don't actually have their testimony. They told someone else who told someone else. We don't know how many people, like how many steps of separation there were before it got written down. And then we don't have the original written text, which was in a different language than Jesus actually spoke.
Yeah.
And decades after the fact, you have somebody probably wrote it in like maybe 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 CE, but we don't even have any of those. It's like 100 years later that we have like a tiny scrap, a tiny fragment of text called P52 that's like a few slivers of verses from John.
Yeah.
And that's our best evidence. I'm gonna like base my entire life and my identity, and I'm going to give 10% of my income to these organizations and make all of these sacrifices to an organization based off of that, like this tiny, measly, awful, horrific form of evidence. It's just, I see that and I'm like, as I was processing it, and then you start learning about things like epilepsy and sleep paralysis and stuff, where these are things that have been falsely attributed to demons. And when you actually know the neuroscience behind what's really going on, it's really hard to then read passages in the Bible where they're like, oh, this person, they brought this epileptic to Jesus and cast a demon out of him.
Yeah.
And it's like, we know what epilepsy is. Like, we can scan it in the brain. We can give people medicine and cause the seizures to stop. Like, it's not demons.
Yeah, right.
And yet it makes sense that, 2,000 years ago in the Iron Age, that people without modern medicine or modern, neuroscience and brain imaging would assume that there's dark, evil spirits that are possessing the body, because that's what it looks like.
Right.
It looks like the person's being, embodied by something dark and awful and rolling around foaming at the mouth.
Yeah.
But if we know better now, how can we possibly read these texts and there's like, they brought this epileptic to him and the demon seized him and he fell on the ground foaming at the mouth, and Jesus commanded that the demon come out of him. I'm just like, really?
Yeah.
Really? Like, in the 21st century, are we really saying that demons cause epilepsy? It's mind-blowing.
Yeah.
That 2 billion Christians can think that. I mean, not every Christian does, obviously, but like, yeah. So it was my deconstruction process. It was a lot of like little things like that, realizing that hell was a made up concept, that the Jews didn't believe in hell and that it slowly evolved over time, realizing, just so many of these things about, human psychology. I read a lot of incredible books on it, like Thinking Fast and Slow, or Predictably Irrational by, I think it's Dan Ariely, and you start to realize like our brains make mistakes. We get stuff wrong all the time. And so I just don't find texts from 2,000 years ago by anonymous authors written, decades after the fact, where a few scraps survive. I just don't find that more reliable than the most cutting edge, well-documented, peer-reviewed, double-blind clinical trials of the 21st century with modern technology to test it.
Right. And when did you start talking about this on YouTube? When, because I don't know when you even started your YouTube. Did you go through the entire process of deconstruction and then go, I guess I'm atheist, and then maybe I should talk about this? Or
Oh no, I mean, to some extent, I'm still deconstructing. I think it's kind of a
oh, me
lifelong
too,
journey,
me too.
or at least reconstructing. You know,
Yeah,
you go through a period where I kind of swung towards the angry atheist side of the spectrum, and then kind of swung back a little bit and
sure.
trying to find the right balance.
Did you took a break for a minute,
But
right? Or no?
not really. So I started putting out content in 2015 is when I launched the channel, but it was very sporadic. It was, one video every few months. And 2016 I went full time, but I want to say that my just I'm out, I'm done moment was 2014.
Okay.
I can tell you the exact date. It was the day of the Ken Ham Bill Nye debate. That was kind of my final nail in the coffin. I was
Yeah.
just like, this is BS. I can't anymore.
Yeah.
And the reason that was the moment was, I think that there was an emotional side to it where I'd studied a lot of this stuff, and I'd shifted away where I no longer believed in hell. I no longer believed in demons. So I didn't have that fear kind of holding me back where it's like, what if I'm wrong? And I'd learned about all of the problems with Pascal's wager, just using it as insurance. If I believe in, if at least if I say that I believe, and I'm wrong, then who cares? But if I say that I believe in and I'm right, then I go to heaven instead of hell, right? So I'd seen, and for people not familiar, I've done a whole video on Pascal's wager, but basically it's like there could be an infinite number of religions that you're wrong about. And what if those gods are jealous and every time you go to church, you're pissing them off, right? Like,
right.
Or what if you miss out on a full, incredible, amazing life because, you're sacrificing for this religion, and there's so many costs that come into play, like Jehovah's Witnesses will deny blood transfusions and sometimes die as a result of it, cutting their life short because they're pursuing this religion. I talked about faith healers a minute ago. I talked about other costs that are involved in a religion, and my parents, they gave up everything to move us overseas when I was young as a missionary kid, giving up time and proximity to friends and family, giving up career opportunities. There's a tremendous amount of cost here on this life. And if this is the only life that we have, it makes it infinitely more valuable because it is so much shorter. You have a tiny, narrow window. This is the only life that you have. If that's the case, are you really going to throw it away on religion and say that there's no cost and that there's no risk?
Yeah.
It's so, as I started to kind of piece all of these things apart, and I was deconstructing and I was wrestling with these different questions, I'm watching debates between like Christopher Hitchens and various religious people like William Lane Craig and stuff. But then as I started shifting, I saw this debate, and I've talked about this on loads of other interviews that I've done, so I'm not going to get too much into it here, but it was just the debate between Bill Nye and Ken Ham, where they were asked, what, if anything, would ever change your mind? And Bill Nye is like, one piece of evidence. Ken Ham was like, nothing will ever convince me. And the reason that for me that was my I'm done, I'm out moment was that I had been taught that Answers in Genesis was like, they were legit. They were real scientists going where the evidence led. They cared about the truth. And all the other scientists were just dishonest and lying and wanting to live a life of sin. And what I saw blatantly in front of me was the complete reversal of that. And I realized I'd been lied to, and I was angry.
Yeah. Yeah, that I share that. That's the same, that particular debate and that question specifically was mind-boggling to me, because I thought, wait, so you're saying if the evidence is saying this, you're not going to go with this? Like that boggled my mind. I mean, that literally was a kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back. And I read the book Sapiens, and I had never even heard of Neanderthals, I rejected anything about evolution. I just have been recently really learning about evolution. I was an anti-vaxxer just up to about a year ago. I mean, I'm just like you said, I'm still reconstructing. I'm clearly atheist. I don't even have any lingering fears or lingering, what if I don't really even understand when people that are deconstructing they hold on to that for a minute. I was like, man, that went pretty. As soon as I realized it's a crock of shit, I just let it go and moved on. I said, literally, it's no different than if I was worried about Santa's naughty list. I'm like, what? You can't scare me with that. That's how I feel about when people say, aren't you scared of hell? I'm like, dude, the hell doesn't exist.
My parents threatened me with hell shortly after I deconstructed, and it was like very soon after they realized that I was out and loud and proud about being an atheist. They threatened me with hell, and I'm like, it literally has that same effect. It's like, well, Santa's not going to bring you presents. I'm just like, I'm sorry. It feels like the scene in Lord of the Rings where Gandalf is like, you have no more power here. It's just like your spell is gone. It's the veil has been lifted.
Yeah. So you're folks still Christian
behind the curtain. Very much so. Yeah.
Okay. So we share
they were still missionaries up until a couple years ago.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I actually, interesting note, kind of pulling back just a little bit to what we were talking about a second ago, about the Bill Nye Ken Ham debate. I got to actually meet shortly after that, a few years after that, I met the woman who submitted that question.
Oh,
and it was a very deliberate question, because she's like, I really think that Ken Ham's going to take the bait here, and if he does, like, this is huge. And then I actually met, and I had dinner with Bill Nye several years later at I went to one of the SciCon events, and he was just standing outside with some mutual friends, and we were all going we were all looking to get dinner, and we're like, hey, let's go to Benihana, it's right over here. And so I sat right next to him, and I got to talk to him about that, and I told him, and he had been basically blasted by so many people for agreeing to take that debate.
Yes.
He was getting it from all sides, where people are like, you're legitimizing this pseudoscience scam guy. And I think that their debates can backfire for sure.
Sure.
But I think that one moment in that debate, as someone who was still kind of on the fence and kind of leaned Christian, at least a little bit, who still had a soft spot for answers in Genesis, watching that debate and just seeing the level of just blatant incompetence and dishonesty by Ken Ham. I don't think that, and this is going to be a little harsh to Bill Nye, I don't think that he was a particularly good debater.
No, I agree.
But I think that Ken Ham was so spectacularly awful that it worked out.
Yeah, it's hard to because I find it interesting, it's like the flat earth debate, or it's like, really, that's why would we even debate that? It's like, obviously that's false. It gives it like any kind of credence, and that was part of the feedback I think that Bill Nye got, is that you're giving credence to this. But the reality is, there billions of people believe it. It's like it gives the belief credence. I don't think it gives the truth of it any evident or any credence, because it's like, obviously it's not true. I know I was talking to an evangelical the other day, and I just forget sometimes what we used to think. And this guy's a good guy, man. He's a pilot. And I asked him, I'm just curious, how do you reconcile? Because he was asking me about what made me walk away from faith. And I told him, and I said, man, how do you reconcile like the age of the earth with, the 6-day creation? Because he's a literalist. He said, well, I just believe that, God created it old with the fossils in it. And I sat there for a second looking at him like, did you just freaking say that? And this is a grown ass adult man with children. He's married, I shook my head and I laughed, and he goes, I know. He said this to me. He goes, I know that sounds crazy. And I'm like, yeah, it sounds insane that God would be deceptive.
Sometimes the strongest response is just to just stare at them, just dumbfounded, raise an eyebrow, allow the silence to do the talking.
Yeah.
Give them time to reflect.
Yeah. Gosh, well, man, I have kept you so long, Thomas. I could talk to you forever. I do have a couple questions that I would love to ask. I know my listeners would just love to hear this from you. Because it truly, bro, I'm telling you, it's such an honor to talk to you, for real. I mean, even my son was like, you have Holy Kool-Aid. I'm like, yeah, buddy, he's coming on my show. So my son's freaking out. Anyway, couple things. I think my channel reaches a lot of people that are really just in the throes of deconstructing, and I often like to, if I have a guest on like you who does this, what would you say are some good, resources, whether that's a book or a debate, or obviously your channel clearly helped me. Um, what kind of advice or words of encouragement would you give those who are literally starting to have questions? They're starting to see the fallacies. They're starting to be like, I don't think this is true. And then work through that process and really get through it and out of the fear. So many people have fear of hell, of what if I'm wrong? I didn't really struggle with that. Anyway.
Yeah, in terms of the fear of hell, I did, not to just plug my own content, but I do have a video specifically on that topic, how to overcome the fear of hell. So it's either how to get over or how to overcome the fear of hell on my channel, Holy Koolaid. Kind of dives into the history and evolution of the concept of hell. As far as a easily approachable, less confrontational way of reading the Bible from the standpoint of an actual scholar, Dan McClellan, he has a podcast called Data Over Dogma, does a really good job of breaking it down. And Dan is still like, I mean, he was Mormon, but he still believes in God, still believes, in the Bible, but he doesn't believe it literally. Like, he doesn't believe all of the stuff. Like, he's very evidence-based. He's very much a scholar. Does incredible scholarship. Bart Ehrman also, if you're interested in biblical scholarship, has some great books as well. Misquoting Jesus is a fantastic place to start to realize like how the Bible has changed over time.
Yeah.
As far as the science goes, some of the best resources, I would say The Demon Haunted World by Carl Sagan. So if you're interested in kind of dipping your toes into science and how to think skeptically, and when I say skeptically, I don't mean cynically, I mean how to think critically and evidence-based, but still be open-minded. Demon Haunted World is a great place to start. There's a lot of books out there by like the James Randi Educational Foundation that have kind of approached. They had like $1 million prize for a long time for anyone who could prove the paranormal or supernatural, and but they would put scientific controls in place that the person being tested would agree to in advance, and no one was able to demonstrate in like 50 years.
That'll never be able to be demonstrated.
Yeah. So those are a couple of great resources. But there's so many incredible, like, if you're just being exposed to science for the first time, watch the Cosmos series. The old one is a little bit dated. The newer one with Neil deGrasse Tyson is still great.
Yep.
Both of them are good, but as far as a exposure to evolution and how it works, there's a YouTube channel called Stated Clearly that has an entire playlist on evolution, and they have John Perry has some of the best animated videos on evolution and natural selection and how it works. It's just incredible short bite-sized animated videos that are easy for just about anyone to understand. I personally, I'm not a huge Dawkins fan. I think when he dabbles outside of evolution, I think he has some bad takes, but if you're wanting a good introduction to how evolution works, The Blind Watchmaker and The Selfish Gene, or maybe in the other order, read Selfish Gene and then Blind Watchmaker. It'll really give you a solid understanding of how evolution works. I was raised with a complete straw man of it. Everything I was taught about evolution was just nonsensical and wrong. And then you read this book and you start understanding what scientists are actually proposing. And it's like, oh, there's actually a lot to this.
Right.
So those are incredible resources. As far as just like psychology and neuroscience and stuff, the You Are Not So Smart podcast is fantastic. Some of the other books I recommended earlier as well. And then as far as like kind of atheist and deconstruction content, there's a channel called Believe It or Not that really dissects and breaks down what a lot of churches teach.
Okay.
Obviously, I have my channel as well. I cover a
Sure.
wide variety of topics.
Yeah.
But as far as an actual organization, Recovering from Religion has a hotline you can call 24/7. You can chat, you can call, and just they're not going to try to deconvert you,
Sure.
but it's just someone you can talk to about your struggles, your concerns, your, where you're at. They have a lot of resources on their website as well.
Yeah. Excellent. Oh,
I know
again,
that was a lot, but
yeah. Yeah. No, I really appreciate it. And I know our listeners, I'm sure they were very familiar with you already. And like I said, you really, really helped me, in those early days to feel like maybe I was on the right track, to be
Mm,
questioning these things, and that some of the ththings that I thought in my mind, like, this seems ridiculous, right? And then,
yeah,
your videos were like, yeah, it's ridiculous.
yeah.
And,
Well,
like
and
you, I
so
probably I still probably come off, I don't know. I'm not angry. I'm just not.
mm,
That's just not, I'm a real nice, fun, kind of laughy kind of a person.
mm,
Um, I definitely think, I have my strong opinions about evangelical fundamental Christianity,
yeah,
for sure. Um, but because I don't resonate with those very hateful, mean kind of atheists. I don't relate to that.
yeah.
But I definitely dog on religion though.
Yeah, yeah, it's difficult because I went through a phase where I was posting memes every single day, scheduling 10 a day that were just mocking and ridiculing, and I think that there's a place for humor and there's a place for, ripping ideas apart, but I think that most Christians are just a lot of them are victims of bad ideas and indoctrination,
True.
and I was there too. And a lot of times it's just, you don't know the arguments of the other side. And
Yep.
so when there's gaps in your understanding, it's very easy to just fill them with something simple, but the simplest answer is not always the right one.
Right.
For years, I really struggled with, well, where did the universe come from? How did life originate? How can you get life from non-life? And
Right.
there's this idea that if you can't plug the gap, therefore it must be God, which
Right.
only further complicates the equation, right? Because you have
Sure.
something that's infinitely powerful, all-knowing, omnipresent. It's just like the levels of complexity for something like this are just like
Yeah.
orders of magnitude
Right.
higher in order to try to explain, the kickstarting of like, okay, the Big Bang happened, and okay,
Sure.
now we've got some hydrogen. But what I've been trying to do here in the last month, but I mean, it's kind of revamping a series that I started 8 years ago. I want to walk people through what we do know about abiogenesis. So before you even get to the earliest cells, the earliest protocells, before you get to a living organism that can actually start to have mutations in its DNA and RNA and for natural selection to start taking off, how do you get there?
Yeah.
And so I have a series that initially I called it The Story of Life, and then I called it The Origin of Life. I think now I've gone a little bit more provocative because it's very educational and dense, but I've learned over the years with YouTube that you have to have slightly uh, more clickable titles.
Yes.
And so
I'm
so
learning
right
that.
now the series is called How Science Buried Creationism.
Oh,
And
okay.
I have a whole playlist, but it's essentially walking you through all of the different steps of what have we demonstrated can happen in a lab in terms of all of the building blocks for life naturally forming together, simply following the rules of chemistry in early Earth-like environments. So
Yeah.
whether that's in deep sea thermal underwater vents or in, volcanic ponds or asteroids hitting the Earth, where will we where do we see amino acids spontaneously forming or nucleotides coming together? Like, do these form naturally? And then in these different environments, how do they start to come together? And how close can we get to an actual cell
Right.
that's reproducing? And so many of these pieces of the puzzle have been filled,
Yeah.
or at least there's plausible mechanisms by which it could have happened.
Right.
And so I'm trying to kind of make that a resource for everyone. So in terms of abiogenesis, I'm trying to make the best resource out there,
Sure.
but
Yeah.
it's a gigantic, gargantuan task to bite off.
Well, and I've really been enjoying it because like I said, I've known of you for years, and I've seen that you've covered some political things too, and then of
Mm,
course almost kind of leaning really, really, in my opinion, I've been looking like, man, he's leaning into the science. This is great,
mm,
So it's like you know, it went from deconstruction only, kind of bashing religion, to now like really helping with reconstruction as well as, you know, the deconstruction too. But it's a resource, it's a tool. I mean, it's been very helpful.
Yeah, because in my opinion, is like deconstruction after a while is like, yeah, we all go through that phase where you're frustrated and you're like, what if anything was true? And you want to break down all the arguments and do videos on the Kalam cosmological argument or Anselm's ontological argument or whatever. But you can only cover that stuff so much before it's so repetitive.
Yeah.
And most people who are Christians, they're not sitting there going, well, I believe because Anselm created this logical argument where he laid out a syllogism. No, most people's beliefs, they're emotionally based. They're reinforced by people around them. You know, they're watching those around them, you know, engage in credibility enhancing displays. And they're like, oh, well, if that person is willing to cut off part of their genitals for their belief, it must be true because, you know, I trust this person. They're willing to make this sacrifice. You know, there's so much that's baked in. And so like, for me, I can push back against the arguments for so long before I reach a point where my own personal curiosity is just, it's too broad to stay put. And I want to explore how the world works. And I think that as you get a bigger picture, you start to see just, I don't know. It's like you explore astrophysics and astronomy and neuroscience and psychology. And, you know, you learn about medicine and evolution and biology and geology and all these different fields. And they all the evidence from all these different areas converges on one specific perspective.
Yeah.
And to me, that's so much more powerful than just like, well, no, there's a logical fallacy inside of the Kalam that breaks down when you're special pleading, you know. It's I just find the science so much more fascinating and exciting, and I want to be able to package that up and share that with people.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, brother, I appreciate it so very much. Everyone go follow Holy Koolaid and make sure to subscribe to his channel. Don't forget, subscribe to my channel, discuss, do all the things down below. If you don't have anything to say, let us know where you're listening from. Peace, everybody.